So really not too much code here. So let's think about what we might want to test there. So I've already set up a target here called the unit test target. If you were setting this up yourself, you would basically go to the project menu here and go new target. And one of the options for a target is a unit test bundle. So that's pretty much how you'd get started adding this to your own project. But I've already done that for this case. Since it's a separate target, there's something interesting here, which is when you're in your overview pop-up menu, and there's a couple other ways to get to this as well, but you can pick the active target at any given time. And by default, your active target, you've probably only ever had one, and it was your application target, which is going to build and run your application. Given that we now want to actually run these unit tests every time we build, we want to set our unit tests target to be the active target. But we also want to make sure that that rebuilds our entire application as well, so that we don't have to keep switching back and forth between these targets. We can just always keep unit test target as the active one, and still be able to do our normal build and run cycle of development. So the way that we've accomplished that then is that if we get info on that unit test target, one of its direct dependencies is set to the test my app target, which is our application target. So what that basically says is that anytime that we try and build the unit test target, before we can do that, we have to make sure that the test my app target is both built and up to date. So if any of the source files have been edited or changed, it'll build them first before it tries and runs the unit tests. All right, so we've got this set up now that we can build our unit tests and run them. There's not too much going on in them just yet. Let me get back to this here.
Can you do it in the reverse order and make the unit tests depend on, you know what I mean, like flip it?
So the question is, can you do it in the reverse order and make the unit test depend on the app? So the issue there is going to be that the new version of like if you had frameworks built as part of your app, which I guess on iPhone isn't going to be a problem, but on macOS 10 would be, the new versions of the framework wouldn't have been built yet before running your. Oh well, I guess that's actually not even true.
Oh, you want your tests to run after your app has been rebuilt?
Yeah, but actually that. Yeah, no, yeah, I don't think you could actually have it work the other way. I've never tried it, so I'm honestly not entirely sure. But if your app hasn't actually been rebuilt, I think you'll be basically testing the last version that you built, not the current version. Right. So our test, our person tests.h just has we're importing send testing kit.h, and we've got person tests inheriting from send test case. So we can just start out implementing a few test cases, and I've already got a couple here. They all start with the word test, so they'll be run automatically. This is probably different than what you've seen with some of the other some of the other unit test frameworks like JUnit. You probably, well, maybe not with JUnit, but with the C++ ones, you certainly would have to have defined which tests you wanted to run yourself. I'm not sure that the Java one probably can figure it out for you. So yeah, you don't have to specify in this case. So our test create person will basically just allocate a person object and assert that it's non-nil. And our set display name is going to get a display name here. We'll just use a static string, allocate a new person object, and use the property access to assign that to the display name property. And then after we've done that, verify that that assignment has actually happened and that person.displayname is in fact equal to the display name that we just tried to set it to. So if we build now, everything's going to work because our code is already correct. There's no problems. So let's go introduce some problems. We've got the display name method here. Let's say we thought that maybe we need to implement our own accessor, or rather our own setter in this case. So we'll do void set display name and a string display name. Well, actually, what did I call that, Ivar? Display name. But let's say that I got distracted after I added that to my source code and I went and did something else, and then I just tried to build. We're going to find out right away that I just implemented an accessor that doesn't actually do any setting or actually have any effect at all. Because if we take a look here at, let's make this bigger, the results of our run unit tests, the first thing we're going to see is that Paul should be equal to null, which is kind of a weird way of expressing it. But it's basically saying that the first variable here should be equal to the second variable here and is not. And person.displayname is null, which is why we see null there. Because we're not actually assigning it to our Ivar. We could have had some other information passed along here. You forgot an assignment. and then that would actually show up there along with the error. And that can actually be a format string, so you could include standard NSLog style format specifiers within that string and then the additional parameters afterwards. So if we go ahead and, I lost my window here. So if we were to go back to our person object then, and then just add the assignment in there. I said it was a copy, and actually need to release that first. Then when we build, oops, no reason to run. But when we build, we no longer have the error because now we've actually assigned the IVAR, so now our test case succeeds again. So it's a quick way to kind of catch that we've made what would otherwise have obviously been a pretty clear mistake, and it's a good way to catch even more complicated mistakes as well. So when does this make sense? Because, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there are certainly cases where it doesn't. Well, basically, you want to try and consider what the return on investment for writing these test cases is going to be. What's the likelihood that you're going to break this code? What is the benefit you're going to get from writing the test case in the future? What is the future benefit you'll get versus the time you're going to have to invest now to actually write the code? And that's always a trade-off. It's kind of hard to say. We all go back and forth on that all the time, I guess. Sometimes, depending on even points in the release cycle. Earlier in release cycles, when there's a lot of time available and there's no release date pressures, or you really feel like you have to get stuff done and checked in and shipped, it's a lot easier to justify spending a little time writing the tests than maybe at the last minute. Although, honestly, at the last minute is probably the better time to be writing the tests because you also are making changes and you really want to make sure you're not breaking stuff then. But having written the tests at the front makes it a lot easier to make changes without being quite as concerned that you're breaking everything later on in the release cycle. So it's a cost-benefit thing, and you kind of have to weigh it for your particular situation as you go. But and also, some types of code are just difficult to test. A lot of this self-contained thing I was talking about is really hard to accomplish if you start talking about networking code or database code. You can often test a subset of the behavior, like verify that the results of your database fetch are processed correctly, but not necessarily do the actual database fetch. You could also, yeah.
Is it possible to test user interface code, stuff like view controllers and stuff?
So the question is it possible to test user interface code? It varies a bit based on your definition of test user interface code, I guess. You can certainly test view controllers type stuff like view will appear and view did appear and basically programmatically initiated and controlled things. Testing things that require user interaction is not really possible. I mean, you can't simulate a series of touches pinching your scroll view, so it's not really reasonable to write unit tests to verify that your touch manipulation code is doing the right thing because you can't actually simulate the input that you would need to verify it.
I think there's some stuff in instruments, I don't know how fully in-depth it's implemented, that can drive some automated UI tapping. You can record some stuff. I'm not sure how well it works.
Interesting.
I mean, can't you just call the methods that the touches would end up calling anyway, and just simulate those in the test function?
Sure. So the question is, couldn't you just call the methods that the touch code would have called anyway? And absolutely. I guess that kind of gets towards the testing a subset of behavior. You can verify that the code that would have run as a result of the user pinching is working correctly, but you can't necessarily test that the code that checks to see that the user is pinching is working correctly. Although I guess Paul says that, I don't know too much about this on my own, but that instruments include some limited support for doing touch manipulation recording and playback. I've never used it. I certainly will look into it now, though. Right, so we've kind of covered this as a little bit of a rehash, but basically the idea is to keep your tests pretty short and pretty lightweight and make them run pretty fast. And that's probably common sense given what we've already said about wanting to run them with every build. If your tests take a super long time to execute, you're probably going to feel like you just want to turn them off and not run them when you're building. So if you keep them short and keep them fast and keep them light, you'll be more likely to leave them on and actually run them and catch your regressions. You also want to try and test individual methods. not necessarily full end-to-end behavior. This kind of goes along with what we were just talking about with testing a subset